In that polling booth in 2027, if they don't count it, we count the person. If you don't know today, the federal government of Nigeria does not want me, Peter Obi, to be a candidate of any party, but I'll be candidate.
Nigeria is heading into what may prove to be one of its most contentious election cycles. With the 2027 presidential election now just 1 year away, political tensions are escalating around 3 interconnected issues: allegations of planned election rigging, a controversial new tax law that critics say will devastate ordinary Nigerians, and questions about whether opposition figures can freely contest for office. At the center of this storm is Peter Obi, the former Labour Party candidate, whose potential movement to the African Democratic Congress has reignited debates about electoral credibility and government accountability. What happened? In April 2025, a Supreme Court judgment was delivered regarding Peter Obi's political status. According to sources close to the matter, the ruling has been under review by government institutions for several months, prompting accusations of deliberate delay. The Independent National Electoral Commission has now released the official timetable for the 2027 presidential election, setting the clock ticking on what opposition voices are calling a critical test of Nigeria's democratic institutions. Meanwhile, Peter Obi has reportedly declared for the African Democratic Congress following what supporters call a migration of the obedient movement from the Labour Party. However, key documentation remains outstanding. No resignation letter from the Labour Party has been made public, and Obi's membership card for the ADC has not been verified by independent observers. Simultaneously, President Bola Tinubu's administration has introduced new tax legislation that has sparked fierce public backlash. The law has not yet been fully implemented, but is expected to take effect after the 2027 elections. Key positions and statements. Opposition figures have accused the ruling All Progressives Congress of planning to rig the 2027 election. They claim the APC and the Independent National Electoral Commission are working in coordination, citing what they describe as deliberate institutional obstruction of opposition candidates. Critics argue that the federal government is actively attempting to prevent Peter Obi from running as a candidate for any political party, despite constitutional guarantees of political participation. Regarding the tax law, opponents have described it as a mechanism designed to extract revenue from Nigerians in order to service unprecedented government debt. According to these critics, President Tinubu has borrowed trillions of naira, more than the previous 2 administrations combined, and now requires increased tax revenue to manage repayments. The proposed tax structure, as explained by legal analysts critical of the policy, would impose an automatic 25% withholding tax on all payments for goods and services. Under this system, if a business receives 100 million naira for building materials, 25 million naira would be immediately deducted and transferred to federal government accounts. Opposition voices warn that this cost will cascade through the economy. Landlords would increase rent by 25%, doctors, carpenters, and traders would raise prices accordingly. School fees would climb. The cumulative effect, they argue, would be economic stagnation and deepened poverty. Crucially, critics claim the collected taxes will not be transparently managed, alleging that revenues will flow into private accounts rather than public services. Nigeria has a troubled history with electoral credibility. The 2023 presidential election was marred by allegations of irregularities, technical failures in electronic result transmission, and accusations of vote manipulation at collation centers. Calls for real-time electronic transmission of results have been a recurring demand from civil society groups and opposition parties. The National Assembly has yet to pass legislation mandating this technology, despite its availability and use in other jurisdictions. Nigeria's legal framework for elections is robust on paper. The country has electoral laws, anti-corruption statutes, and constitutional protections for political participation. However, enforcement remains inconsistent. Critics point to systemic failures, judicial corruption, compromised law enforcement, and regulatory bodies that selectively apply rules. Peter Obi emerged as a significant opposition figure in 2023, mobilizing a youth-driven movement that challenged the traditional dominance of the APC and the People's Democratic Party. His potential shift to the ADC represents a strategic repositioning ahead of 2027, though the absence of formal documentation has raised questions about the legitimacy and timing of the move. President Tinubu's borrowing record has been confirmed by independent fiscal reviews. Nigeria's debt profile has grown substantially under his administration, raising concerns about debt sustainability and the government's capacity to fund infrastructure and social services without imposing additional burdens on citizens. Why this matters? The convergence of these three issues, electoral integrity, taxation policy, and political access, has created a volatile pre-election environment. For ordinary Nigerians, the proposed tax law represents a direct threat to economic survival. Small business owners, market traders, landlords, and service providers would face immediate cost increases that could force many out of business. Consumers would bear the brunt through higher prices for essentials, including food, housing, healthcare, and education. For Nigeria's democratic future, the 2027 election is being framed as a turning point. If allegations of rigging are borne out, opposition figures warn it will set a precedent that future administrations will exploit. The fear is that democratic norms will erode further, entrenching authoritarian governance under the guise of electoral legitimacy. Civil society organizations are calling on Nigerians to actively monitor the electoral process, not just at polling units, but at all collation centers, from ward level through local government, state, and national levels. The strategy is to use mass civic participation as a deterrent against manipulation. Current status and what happens next. The tax law has not yet been implemented. Its enforcement is expected to begin after the 2027 elections, according to opposition analyses. Peter Obi's formal party affiliation remains unclear pending the release of official documentation. The National Assembly has not passed legislation mandating real-time electronic transmission of election results. The Independent National Electoral Commission has published the election timetable, marking February 2027 as the approximate date for the presidential election. Opposition groups are mobilizing supporters to prepare for sustained civic action on election day, including physical presence at collation centers and resistance to intimidation. Nigerians will be watching closely to see whether the government addresses concerns about electoral transparency, whether the National Assembly acts on electronic transmission of results, and whether the courts uphold the rights of all candidates to contest freely. The next 12 months will determine whether Nigeria's democratic institutions can withstand the pressures now building around them. Please subscribe and like and share.